Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. 5 most important breakout players for this Michigan program heading into 2024. And Dill, in my mind, this is the most exciting conversation you can have regarding this Michigan team in 2024. We know who the stars are for this Michigan program, right? Will Johnson, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Colston Loveland. We kind of know that this Michigan team is going to be damn good in 2024. I think the question is how good this Michigan team is. Kind of relies on some of these players that we haven't seen play a ton of football breaking out in the 2024 year. The boys have our 5 most important breakout candidates fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Michigan fans. It's been a blast to talk this program over the last couple of weeks, and a lot of our discussion had been regarding the recruiting trail over the last couple of weeks. We still have a 4th straight Big Ten championship to win. So we got to start taking a look back into the 2024 season. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, this roster is chock full with breakout candidates. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Bill, in my mind at least, kind of calling your shot. Like, who are going to be the guys that break out in 2024? We'll chop it up with you guys down in the comment section and getting into our number 1 breakout candidate. It's got to go to the offensive line. And Dill, there's going to be a lot of national media chatter about this Michigan offensive line taking a step back in 2024 after losing, 6 guys to the NFL. I think a lot of Michigan fans are sitting there and saying, we got a lot of guys who are damn good offensive linemen that on other Power 5 programs would have been multi-year starters, but at Michigan had to wait their turn. Andrew Gentry is probably the offensive lineman that excites me the most. You talk about just all the upside in the world. 6'8", 310, was a former top 100 national recruit coming out of high school. He took the 2-year mission. This is now his 3rd season with this Michigan program. Can he emerge as an all Big Ten caliber tackle for Michigan on the opposite side of Miles Hinton, who I've been very vocal, is going to be an all Big Ten caliber guy? Massive storyline for this Michigan team.
I think you've kind of seen his progression over the past couple of years. Mainly getting your chance to watch him in the spring games, but started at guard, went to tackle last year. Looks like he's going to play on the right side this year. And I think you've seen him kind of athletically develop into what you needed him to be. Again, I think you always kind of knew the ceiling was being a really, really good guard. But I think, again, you look at that 6'8" frame, that length, that athleticism he had. If he could figure out that tackle position and play it really effectively, I think that's where you want him to be. And again, I think you saw the moments of that in last season, if you will, during some of those games like Nebraska and those other games where Michigan was blowing teams out. So you did get to see a bit of him. And then I think you saw a big jump in the spring. I thought him and Guarnero looked awesome on the right side there, moving guys around. I thought his ability to pass pro and use that length that he has was really, really solid. So, again, I'm kind of looking at this offensive line. You could go 4 or 5 different ways, arguably, with this, because I think guys like Crippen, El Hadi, I don't count Miles Hinton as a breakout. I think he's broken out. We know he's a stud. But I think you go with a bunch of different young guys who have played really good football. I just think Gentry, to me, has that.
I think he's the most exciting. And you look at a guy like Andrew Gentry and say you kind of knew he was going to be a little bit of a project, right? This was a guy that had all the traits in the world coming out of high school, a little bit clunky. And you've seen Michigan do a really good job kind of cross-training these offensive linemen. You think back to when Carson Barnhart goes out to tackle, has to kick into guard. Grant Newsome, Sherrone Moore, they've done a great job with this offensive line. And if you can kind of just trust the development of guys like Andrew Gentry, I think you could be looking at an all Big Ten caliber tackle sticking on the offensive side of the football. And one of the most underappreciated positions on this Michigan team is the tight end too. You look at Colston Loveland, in my mind, he's the number 1 tight end in the country heading into 2024. But you look at how this Michigan offense wants to operate, it's with a lot of 12 personnel, using 2 tight ends at a time. You look historically, Loveland and Barner last year. You look at Loveland and Scooney in 2022, and then Eric All and Schoon in 2021. Michigan has always had 2 really good tight ends. We know we have one. I think the question is who's going to be the second. You're getting a guy in Marlon Klein that, again, going into year 3 with this program, so much upside as a former German football player who moved to the United States. if this kid can emerge as that tight end too, I mean, you're looking at some serious firepower for this Michigan offense.
And you always knew he'd probably be a good receiver. You saw it was what got him recruited ultimately at that position, a bit leaner coming out, more of a pass catching tight end. But I think you've just seen the physical development at Michigan. You saw him in that spring game, looked huge, looked almost like the size of a tackle, but then you still see the ability to make plays in the pass after catching balls, making guys miss and making those plays. So again, I'm kind of with you. I think people like to talk about Michigan lacking offensive talent at the skill spots. Maybe at times that's been kind of true. It's not like Michigan's been the creme de la creme of producing wide receiver talent, but they've been as good as anyone about putting guys at tight end and making them really effective. So again, you kind of can have, you're still same kind of set where you have those two really good tight ends, both can block at a high level in the way Sherrone Moore is going to want to run.
And I look at Marlon Clark. You said he looked like a tackle. I thought he looked like Braden McGregor out there. I thought Braden McGregor came back for another year during that spring game. He looks like he's ready to step on a field and be a Big Ten tight end. And again, that's massive. You have to be able to inline block if you're going to play as the tight end in this Michigan offense. We kind of know that he's going to have some firepower as a pass catcher. And to kind of go back to what you said about the lack of development of offensive skill, yeah, you could probably make that argument at the wide receiver spot, but you look at what's important to this Michigan offense, the lack of development at the tight end and running back spot hasn't been true. I mean, you look at them putting a lot of resources into developing and getting really good talent at the running back spot and tight end spot. That's how this Michigan offense wants to operate. Sherrone Moore has a clear picture of what he wants this offense to look like. Dill, going over to the defensive side of the football, let's talk about edge rusher TJ Guy. And this one might confuse some of the listeners in terms of why is TJ Guy one of the most important breakout players for Michigan. I think my argument here would be you look at what made Michigan so special on the defensive line. Yes, they had a lot of good football players. They were extremely deep on the defensive line. We had 4 edge rushers play a ton of football for Michigan going back to last year. You know you have 2 really good ones in Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart. What's going to make Michigan special again on defense? Yeah, you have the star talent, but you have to have the depth. And a guy like TJ Guy, if you've been kind of plugged into reading the spring practice notes, kind of sounds like a guy that's ready to make that jump going into year 4 with the program. And Dill, this is just classic why Michigan has had so much success over the last couple of years. Getting a guy like TJ Guy into the program, little under-recruited out of high school, spends 3 years as kind of a scout team reserve kind of guy, and then year 4, all of a sudden, he's an all-conference caliber player. If that happens for TJ Guy, that's massive for this Michigan defense.
Yeah, I think he obviously shot onto the screen in that spring game. I thought he looked amazing. And people kind of were saying that if you were listening to the beat reporters and kind of the rumble out of the Michigan camp, look out for TJ Guy. Then you see it in the spring game, really, really good. Then you even go back to last year in his shots. I mean, against Michigan State, he looked really good. And to me, I think he has some of that athletic juice that you haven't really seen, frankly, at Michigan at that defensive end spot where you've had really, really good players, guys like McGregor, Harrell. I mean, you probably have to go back to like the Ojabos and Hutchinsons to see guys who move the way he does, have the flexibility he does, in the burst off the line of scrimmage that he's kind of shown. So, again, you have heavy defensive ends for sure with guys like Derek Moore. But I think Michigan fans have probably wanted, since going back to that 2021 year, guys like those Ojabos and Hutch who could really put the numbers up on the sacks.
Yeah, I think that's going to be Josiah Stewart. And I love Derek Moore. Derek Moore is more of that heavy-handed edge rusher who's phenomenal in the run game. And I think Derek Moore is going to be an all-conference caliber player. I think he was last year, quite frankly, going to be in 2024. But Josiah Stewart, Dill, you talked about like that lethal first step, really challenging offensive tackles on that outside shoulder running the arc. Josiah Stewart has that kind of juice. TJ Guy in a similar way. And Dill, you mentioned it. You go back to the 2023 year. TJ Guy only rushed the passer 33 times, had 4 quarterback hurries, had a 24% pass rush win rate. That was the highest on the team. Like, this is a guy that in his limited snaps was able to play some good football. Now in a more heavier role, can he kind of maintain that consistency? Big time question mark for Michigan. I think we got a good guy there, though. Going to the linebacker room, and this is where the boys kind of start bending the rules a little bit. Ernesthman probably broke out last year. He's been really good. He was really good as a true freshman at Nebraska. Was really Dill. I looked at the number. He's number 3 in tackles for this Michigan defense. We had him in our notes. We're sticking with him. it might be stretching it in terms of breakout. That being said, we do lose Junior Colson and Mikey Barrett. I'm going to say something that maybe some Michigan fans will disagree with. I'm interested to hear your take. Ernest Hausman, Jayshon Barham, is that a higher ceiling linebacker room than what we had last year?
Oh, it has to be. I mean, I love what we have. And Junior Colson, probably the best linebacker out of all four of them, let's say, if you include Mike Barrett and the two we got this year. But I think, yeah, you look, Jayshon Barham, we were really hard to know what exactly he can be. He was so good at Maryland and a little bit more dynamic probably than what Michigan's seen at that inside linebacker spot, where probably a little bit more effective in the pass rush, probably has some of those traits you want to see from a guy who can probably play a couple of different positions, where Ernest Hausman, I think the big thing I'm looking for from him is to have that ability to be almost that number one middle linebacker, be able to play that position really consistently, and almost if he has to be the lone backer in certain sets, be that guy. Because again, I think you want to be able to use Jayshon Barham in a variety of different ways, whether that's offline, offline.
100% agree with that. If Ernest Hausman can be just that stout middle linebacker that can clean up a lot of messes and gives you that flexibility to get creative with a guy like Jayshon Barham, I kind of start thinking about what does the best kind of Michigan defense look like. That's probably how it looks. And Dill, you look at that linebacker room. I mean, Jimmy Rolder didn't play too much as a second-year kid. He's going into year 3. And I'm going to shout out Cole Sullivan, true freshman. In the spring game, I thought he'd be a little bit more of a project. He doesn't look like a project. He looks like a guy that can play relatively early for Michigan. Kind of intrigued in terms of how he gets worked into that linebacker room. Going to our last player, and Dill, we made this comp when he committed to Michigan, and I'll say it again. Can Amir Hall be like Josh Wallace, where you go back to this time last year? We knew we had Will Johnson on one side, some question marks about what's going to be the cornerback 2 on the other side. And those question marks, they could have answers. Guys like Jair Hill, we are fired up about him. But bringing in Amir Hall just makes you feel better about what this cornerback room is going to be. And then what I'd add about Amir Hall, this is a guy that I spent a lot of time watching going back to his Albany days. I think he's a little bit more physically gifted than Josh Wallace. And so you asked me, he played really good, was an FCS All-American at Albany. Can he make that jump? I mean, 6'1", 200 pounds, a fluid mover that gets his hands on a lot of footballs. He's got really, really long arms. I look at this kid and say I would not be surprised if he's not only Michigan's cornerback too, but if this guy's an all-conference player for Michigan in the 2024 year.
Yeah, and I think you knew coming into this spring transfer portal window that they probably needed to add some depth in through that cornerback ranks. And again, you go back to what's made Michigan really good, having a bunch of versatile guys and having depth. You didn't have Amir Hall, a guy who you can really believe in, just given what you've seen and how much experience he's going to come into Michigan with. Well, the fact he's already picked up a couple of different defenses in his college career, going from Richmond to Albany, now to Michigan. So a guy who you get a smart player, a good enough athlete for that level that he needs to be. Again, I think you want Jair. You want to see Jair Hill out there if you're a Michigan fan, just because it is the attractive, younger guy who has that higher upside, arguably. But at least you do know you have a really, really high ceiling, I think, with Amir Hall.
I think you have a high floor, but that's the thing that I think makes him a little different from Josh Wallace. I think the ceiling with this kid is extremely high as well. Dill, those were our 5 most important breakout players. There's probably 15 players that you could make an argument are the most important breakout players. I look at guys on the inside of the defensive line, potentially Eno Etta being a massive breakout guy. You mentioned some guys on the offensive line. You look at the running back room and say you could argue Donnie Edwards is a breakout caliber guy. And then obviously quarterback Alex Orji, who we left out. We probably should have led with this, quite frankly. Left Alex Orji out because we're going to talk a lot about Alex Orji during fall camp. We've already talked a lot about Alex Orji, so we wanted to give some other players kind of some shine, kind of some burn. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Again, the Michigan fans, appreciate you guys.
I think they're going to be honest about leaving some of the wideouts out. To me, I think Tyler Morris has a very high ceiling, and I'm very excited to see him be the kind of.
And I'm more of a Smaj Morgan guy, so there's plenty of wide receivers that you could go with as well. Some of those young cats. Would love to hear from you guys. Again, appreciate y'all more than you guys know for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.